All right, hi everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Carvel community meeting. Today's date is April 5th, 2021. Just a reminder to please read and abide by our code of conduct, which is right here in the agenda. These meetings are being recorded and added to our YouTube playlist within 48 hours of they're being recorded. If you have anything that you wish to discuss while attending these meetings, please add that to the agenda down here at the discussion topics. For anything that we don't get to today, we will move those to our Carvel office hours, which are held every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. For anything that you wish to also bring to the group that you need help with regarding Carvel, we invite you to attend those office hours as well, and the maintainers are there to help you out with anything that you may need. The Carvel office hours will be held next time for this week. It'll be April 8th. So we invite you to join us then as well as every Monday we have our Carvel community meetings. If you're watching this from home, we invite you to attend one of those as well. With that, I will stop sharing my screen. And Aaron, do you want to take over?
Sure, sounds good. All right, let's make this a little easier to read. Cool, so we'll start out with a couple announcements. So as we mentioned, we're hiring a staff engineer, so please tell your friends, or if you're excited, please check out the rec and see if it's a good fit for you. We had a big release last week, image package version 0.60. Let's open this one a bit. And the big feature set here that was released is the nested bundles work. So this is being able to reference a bundle within a bundle within a bundle and so forth. Dennis, is there anything you want to share in particular about this?
No, I think that captures it. Performance improvement as well. Copying can take from several minutes to less than a second if it's copying from one image to the other and it's the same registry. It mounts the blobs.
Cool. So please try it out. Let us know if you have any feedback. We are eagerly awaiting to see how this feature is used by folks. So maybe we can move through the updates then. Helen's planning to go over the roadmap, so maybe we'll skip over that right now and wait till Helen's able to join. But then touching on the other things that we have going on. So as mentioned, the recursive bundles, also known as nested bundles, has been completed. Please provide any feedback. YTT schemas is in progress. Anyone want to share on that one?
Yeah, just a little detail there is track's been going on for some time. We're addressing feedback regarding it. We discovered a few things that need to be fixed as part of allowing schemas in private libraries. So those are ongoing.
Cool. We also have the package manager API work that is in flight. Feel free to check out more by clicking into the epic. This work is continuing to be updated and cutting alpha releases through a dev packaging branch. If you want to live on the dangerous side and consume some alpha releases, you're welcome to, but things may move quickly and break. And then there are also some other kapp-controller enhancements that are just kind of being tighter in here into the backlog. So it looks like we may have Helen available now. Hey, Helen. Do you want to step through the roadmap?
Yeah, sure.
Cool, I'll stop.
Let's see, share my screen here. So every month we'll try to kind of review where we are, what our priorities are as a team. So if you've attended a community meeting last week, you might have seen this diagram. So a few things to note. We have different tracks of items here, and whatever that is, like filled boxes, those are active development that we're coding and developing. The things that are outlined are things that we are either identifying the problem space or coming up with a solution. It's something that we call discovery and framing space. So, you know, we have kind of pretty much two tracks of work going on. There are people developing, there are people and constantly, you know, discovering and exploring. So that's kind of like the two things to highlight if you haven't seen this last month. And each of the boxes have relative sizing. You know, as we go, we'll definitely unearth more of the scoping and what the size is. But these are kind of like the relative sizing of different boxes and the priority order of different things. So on a given day, we have 3 tracks active. We have prioritized YTT, image package, kapp-controller. Some of the other tools we understand, like kapp and kbuild is there, and people are coming up with requests. We are going to prioritize them based on needs. So if there are any specific kapp, kbuild, or any other tools that are not these 3 at the top, please utilize the feature voting capability in each of the GitHub issues. So you can throw a thumbs up or heart or smiley emoji in each of the issue that you would like us to, you know, focus on and prioritize it. That's one way we would like to hear your feedback and your opinions. Without that, we'll be, you know, heads down working through these top 3 tracks. So wanted to call that out. So YTT, what we're currently working on is the type checking piece for schema. And we think it's quite a big of a chunk of work. So we're still working through that. And afterwards, what comes is this notion of supporting unannotated YAML as data values. And this will come really powerful when used with the new packaging API from kapp-controller. So that as you're using the packaging API from kapp-controller, you're not just bound to using YTT's data values, but you can bring any other data values. So again, kind of following our Unix philosophy, you know, we want to be that composable tool. We also want to be able to allow that mix and match of different tools. So that's what we're focusing on. And afterwards, we're gonna work on supporting open API schema. What we mean by that is that, you know, you can now export YTT schema into open API schema. Again, related to packaging API. This gives you that flexibility. When you're leveraging kapp-controller's packaging API, you're not just bound to using YTT schema, but you can bring any open API schema and you can do validations and type checking and all that. We'll be continuing on the schema track where now we're going to do validations. So it's not just structural type checking, but you should be able to check, validate like ranges and like values or required fields and all that. So that's what's coming. Cool. I won't go further. There's a bit more, but we'll come back next month. Who knows? Things shift. So in order to work through these, you know, development track, we're prioritizing those discovery tracks accordingly. And yeah, for image package track, we just wrapped up recursive bundles. So now you have the ability to create a bundle and a bundle and a bundle and a bundle for eternity. And it has different names. I think in our tweet, we said nested bundles. Basically, it's the same. Nested bundles, recursive bundles. It's all for you. We would love to hear from you. If you try it out, love to hear your feedback and continue to improve that user experience. In addition to that, regarding to image package, we've been working on 2 different initiatives. More or less kind of lightweight involvement, but we wanted to involve in different open source community as well, how they're doing image signing. Some of our members have been going to Notary V2 or CoSign and different initiatives to kind of talk about what is the future of image signing. So we've been spending some time there. And there are other open source that we are chiming into their SIGs and working groups. So those are some of the effort that we have there. With kapp-controller, the teams continue to building on the expand on the current alpha release of packaging API. So hopefully sometime in the summertime, the team is hoping to release a GA version of it. So the team is constantly working through it. Feedback is much appreciated as well. The alpha release is out there. So if you have questions about it or concerns or need improvements, please you can reach out to us either through community meeting, open office hours, or Slack. So we're all ears for your feedback. I know I've kind of like fly through all this, but this is what we have. And some of these information we're hoping to capture in our GitHub as well. So thank you. Passing back to Aaron.
Cool. Thank you, Helen. All right. I guess before moving forward, any other updates from folks?
Just a reminder, this is the last week for comments on the proposal open for image package, the renaming proposal. So if you haven't had time, just go through it. I'll add it at the discussion, the link there. I forgot to do that. Just look at it, see if it's something that interests you, just go through it, see if there's anything that is strange or if it looks good for your use case. And if not, just comment and we'll have a chat. 9th would be the day that we'd like to merge this PR, so the end of the week.
Cool, thank you. All right, we can dive into the backlog then. See which stories we have to discuss. I think we have just a little bit of cleanup to tidy up the recursive bundles epic. But schemas V1 still is our top priority. I know we have a bit of runway here. Would it be valuable in discussing the next story right now?
Yeah, one thing that I wasn't quite clear, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, Carrie, whether or not we've covered that issue 333, the command line data values in the private library work, or is this in addition to that?
This is separate. There's a bit more work to do for allowing or supporting schemas with the data value flag. I think the story actually does need a little bit of work also before we can cover it here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then the any type, I think we're ready to go there.
315, this one?
Yeah, the 315 one. Let's see. Yeah, let's at least talk through this and see how the conversation goes. I think we're pretty set with this. Sorry, some of these have been sitting for a minute. Yeah, and if I butcher anything, Stephen, please feel free to speak up. Yeah, thank you, sir. So the essence of this feature is to effectively, in a surgical way, turn off the schema check for a particular key. So so be able to specify a type such that any type effectively is allowed. It sort of represents all types. Anything could pass through is the idea. And the point here being that at the very least, if there's some kind of situation where you want to use schema, but there's a greater constraint than what is available currently in the set of types that we support, to be able to somehow maybe turn that off and check that in some other way until we get to being able to support that very specific type. An example here is,
I was just about to say the
yeah.
canonical example is our int or string, which is a Kubernetes type that allows, as the name implies, either an integer or a string. And that is just currently not supported in a schema, in a YTT schema, that is.
Yeah, perfect, Stephen. Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly a great example. So this way that you're not stuck. So you can begin using the feature, and if for some reason you need a value like that, you can tell it to back off. Or if you genuinely, as the author, don't want to put a constraint on what value would show up there. Maybe you actually don't care what a particular value is under a key. So that's the spirit. So let's see, this first one is if an annotate any node as AnyTrue, and there's a value there, including null, then that should pass validation. So there's your happy path. All right, whenever you're ready, we'll scroll down to the next one. Okay, and then this one is, well, what do we mean by any false? Then implied in this is that, well, it just means whatever is inferred. So one reason why you might want to do this is if for some reason that value over here, the Boolean for that value, you want to be calculated. So maybe you want to turn it on or off, whether or not you want that to be dynamic. So that'll be sort of a case like that. And yep, as if it had never been annotated with type any. All right, and here's some thoughtful like edge cases to make sure we catch these. So if you include something besides any, I think this is the introduction of the type annotation here. So we're only going to support the any keyword argument. Give you nice feedback if you say anything else. If the type of the value that's being specified, excuse me, is anything but a Boolean, but a starlark Boolean, true or false, capital title case, then you get a nice error message to kind of point you along the way. So helping you out as an author. And then this last bit is on documentation. So making sure that we describe this in a way that makes it clear that it shows up as reference. Yeah. Here's just a little note, just kind of likely we would be able to remove one of the schema types perhaps and say that it's a document schema that allows any. I don't know, something to explore. How'd I do, Stephen? Was there anything missing there? I know you you had put this together.
I think this is great. That last
Cool.
note at the bottom there is perhaps interesting, just that arrays must continue, or pardon me, schemas must continue to be well formed. So arrays need exactly one item. You can't have a null. So we don't relax any constraints on that. We're just now, once your schema is used to template data values, then the data values will not complain if the schema will not complain if the any keyword is there.
Clarifying questions.
I have a question, which is right now the types of these data values are inferred through the value. Is there anything in the spec or future roadmap about making the type of a data value explicit, like data values type equals string? Is that something we're thinking of doing in the future? Yes, okay. Then how, like, I was just thinking like how that would work with any equals true, and or maybe what the thoughts were around maybe using like a superclass, like, you know, the any type, like type equals string or type equals any, instead of having the special attribute any equals true or false. Might be useful for other people watching as well. I don't know.
That's a good question. One thing to note, it was that case of like making any toggleable. So that was one thing. The other is that kind of philosophically, any itself is in some conceptually is not really a type. It's a collection of types. It means sort of everything. So that sort of has driven that this is, as opposed to a special keyword that means other keywords like int, string, map of all types, lists of all types, etc. That it would mean that it would be a separate flag that sort of implies all types. So we'll see how that flies, but that was the thinking behind that.
That makes sense. And so if we have an explicit type in the future equals string and any equals true, that's probably an error case. You can't have both.
I would think so.
Cool.
I think if you're doing that, I don't know. We'll have to like game that out.
What happens if you have a any annotation equals true, and then, so for example, like let's imagine that you have the bar there, and you have an array, right? If this is a map, if you put a map here for some reason and then try to force a type, what happens?
Do you mean with the any equal true?
Yeah. So if you have exactly this, and then you have another foo here, foo, dot dot, and then a 0, what happens? Because in the end, oh my God, my letters are awesome now that I'm noticing it. So what I was saying is that currently we have an array that has a 0 on it. What if inside that array we had this? And I cannot move this. So in the end, you're saying that foo, that inside of this any, you need to have a foo that is an int. Is this like what should happen in a case like this?
When the document is type checked, it should allow anything. So whether or not there was a map or a string or a list or whatever, or a Boolean itself, like for each of those items, like there should be no violation detected.
I think the key insight there for me is that we're actually annotating the array item as an item. So not the contents, not the 0, not the map that might be in there, but the array item.
Okay. So that it's, So it's not possible. Like, okay, in the end, what I'm trying to see here is that you can have anything in there, but you cannot force a type of something that's inside of it. So that's it. Okay. And should it error out? Or should it not do anything? It's fine.
Are you saying in the case where you supplied something besides an integer here for an element in bar, what should it happen? Is that what you're asking?
Yes. Like in the end, oh, I see that you have like this example there on the bar on the bottom, but it
Nice example, Steve. Yeah, that exactly illustrates the point.
okay. Like in the end, I feel like I'd prefer a more complete example here than just a single one layer thing where you have just key and a value. I prefer if like key and then have an array of something that's a map. But you have, if you have an any on top of that array item, it doesn't matter what you put inside of it. But I think I understand what we have here, and I think my case is covered by this one. Yeah.
Cool, that it doesn't matter whether it's a scalar or some kind of collection, we really do mean anything. And that at this point, any children of this node are not checked. Cool, cool. Any other questions? All right, everybody's starting to think about points now. Go ahead and signal when you think you've got a sense of the intrinsic complexity. Give it a thumbs up here.
Do you have a scenario? I forgot. Do you have a scenario where you put this annotation on top of a map or an array?
Like here.
A map on top of a map. So like we are annotating map items,
Oh, I see.
right? And array items. Do you have like I think I believe it would be like an error case, right? If you try to annotate an array or if you try to annotate a map.
I don't think it's currently possible to add an annotation to a collection, whether that's a doc set, a map, or an array.
It's not possible because it gives you an error or because it is ignored.
Within the code, I believe the closest thing to apply an annotation to can never be a collection. So if we put an annotation in a file, the thing it applies to will never be one of those collections.
Yep, to put a finer point on it, that's perfect, Stephen. And to put a finer point on it, if you attempt to try and put an annotation on a collection, let's say you use like the brackets to name an array and you think you're putting an annotation on top of that, the annotation applies to the first element in that array. Same story with the map. If you try and use the flow notation for YAML and you try and annotate, it'll apply to the first item.
So the bar example, if you move the annotation one line up, it would work.
Are you saying here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that would mean that bar could, instead of it being at least an array, because at this point it's saying it's an array of anything. But it's at least an array. It's a collection of things. And if you put the annotation above the bar, it means, well, then bar can contain anything, including a list.
Interesting. Didn't we just say that you could not annotate collections?
Correct.
But you just
So
said that this
when
could
you lift
annotate
that up a little
collections.
bit, you are not annotating a map. You're again annotating the key value pair bar something. So it's that map item specifically, the bar item.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is there a kind of corner case or complexity that you're concerned about here?
I'm trying
What's,
to
what's
understand how
bugging
this
you?
works, and I don't know, it doesn't feel easy to grok how this works. But okay.
Yeah, is this a concern about usability or about functional completeness?
Usability more
I
than
see.
anything else.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would consider stuff like that to be something that, like, as a pair should, let's not take anybody who's writing a story as the authoritative source on what is good UX, but that we're all responsible for that. And if you do see something you're like, this is not feeling great, like we should absolutely, like, we're all shaping this together. So yeah, like the whenever we write a story like this, I think our attempt is to try and get you as close as we can with given what we know at the moment when we're writing the stories, but certainly not to dictate how things should work per se, especially if the impact, if like what the result is off from what the intention was. Cool. Okay. See, Garrett's don't want to put any pressure on anybody, but coming back to the prompt, if you have a sense of what you think the intrinsic complexity, thumbs up. Okay. Cool. All right. Cool. All right. 1, 2, 3. Throw. Super close. Stephen volunteered to do the story, and we got. Anybody want to bring up anything that we didn't yet touch on in terms of some complexity you see we just haven't mentioned, or anything you want to say that you observe about the story we haven't touched on? Okay, cool. This one's a rough consensus is a 3.
Just a question about the documentation side of it. Are we merging documentation with this story, or are we waiting for a cut of a new version of YTT to do that?
I think when we wrote this, the documentation story was ahead of this one. I can't remember. Good question. If the documentation story had been played before this, then this is additive. Otherwise, we could shift that to the one story. The whole point was to sort of get the whole feature set complete, because we knew we were shifting things here and there. Okay, cool. Sweet. Yeah, and then in terms of that track, Aaron, we're really looking at we'll bake the command line data values story soon, and then we have some usability, and then finally removing the feature flag there. So it's exciting. We're getting close.
Cool. It sounds like we can bounce out of that track, and I know one other story that I think would be good to discuss today would be this Explorer. So supporting the ability to export Open API from YTT schema.
Yeah, so Helen touched on this at the top of the update. In essence, the need here is sort of two parts in this Explorer. One is what's the best experience? So I'm a configuration author, and I want to include my schema in some other tool that's using Open API. So one of the concrete drivers we have is in the packaging API from kapp-controller. And so that you're able to actually specify the schema for inputs into the package, and that's in this Open API format. So what should that look like? What's the command line feature? Where should this go under template? Should this be another command or something like that? So taking some time to like explore different options and come up with a proposal around that. And then the other thing is a bit of a gut check. Like, let's go take a look at the Open API spec. We've done this in the past, but just this is a kind of final flight check, pre-flight check, as we're writing stories for this particular feature, story or stories. And so that's it. So it's some lightweight proposal about what that UX looks like. Maybe you come into some interesting points as you do that exploration, capture those there, and then a set of stories that would implement the proposal. And by proposal, it's lowercase p. Like, really, this is not about like go create a PR per se. Whatever's appropriate there. Like, if those tend to be when there's some controversy that needs to get worked out, or it's large enough scope that's a big impact. This could be something you capture in just a Google Doc or in an issue. Would be great. Something that describes the overall feature is fine. Doesn't have to be heavyweight. Did I explain that well? If you had to pick this up, do you have a sense of what you would do with this? Anything ambiguous about that? Okay. And then Aaron, I think we have been putting, like a 1 estimate on these things.
That sounds good.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you for introducing this one. And then, so between, YTT schemas, that explore story, the next things in the backlog would start being some of these kind of loose items, the loose GitHub issues that are prioritized already, which we have talked about in the past, but it's been a little bit. So maybe looking at a couple of these, does anyone have any questions or things that they want to dive into right now? Okay. I think I saw we have, we have a couple discussion topics. So maybe we'll dive into these. So add per wait timeout.
I put this one on the list. I'm happy to talk to it unless someone else wants to.
I can, since it's my issue, but if you want to have a non-biased conversation about it, maybe somebody else.
Sure, I can just summarize the issue and then, yeah, so this issue is specifically about adding a way to configure a timeout for kapp that is done per operation, or like per change. So like currently kapp has a configurable timeout for the entire deployment. So if you have one change that kapp is working on for 30 minutes, the deployment will time out after 30 minutes, for example. That's not the default timeout. Or if there are multiple changes that are taking up to 30 minutes, it'll time out at that time. This would be to add a timeout for specifically one change So if one change takes longer than X amount of minutes, then basically failed the deployment. I brought this up here because I thought it was interesting, and I'd love to have any more context on like what people are thinking. I think it's certainly an interesting idea, and yeah, I have some questions, but if there's more others want to add, I'll leave room for that.
Yeah, I'm wondering how granular. So when we say change, we create a resource that changes the entire creation, or we're updating a resource that changes just the updating of that resource. I'm wondering if we want to continue down this approach, like whether there's value in, I expect this pod to not take any longer than 10 seconds during the pod initialization phase, or during the container creation phase. I'm wondering if we should be that granular and not just 30 seconds to create or update any resource. I'm just wondering whether the nice kind of level to set that at is at.
I think that goes along with what I was thinking about too, which is, yeah, how granular is a change? What is a single change? Is this like one generation? Like Kubernetes has multiple fields that we look at when we look for a resource to be completely deployed. Do we want to look at those each individually, or do we want to lump them into sort of one change? I think that there's interesting things to think about there.
Yeah, great point. I can think of a deployment that should go super fast. And I can think of another deployment that has a lot of moving parts that will take a while to come up.
Yeah, I think my initial thought was just like Cap already creates this change graph that like sort of encapsulates everything that the change entails. And just defining like an upper bound on the time that those would take to apply. I think increasing the granularity could become a lot of configuration, potentially an unwieldy amount. So I thought this was like a nice medium of like, okay, nothing should take longer than a couple minutes. So instead of sitting around waiting for 15 minutes to figure out if it's failed, it can just wait for 5 and then tell me something's going on. And it seems like a cheaper change to do that instead of per like type of change and stuff. So, and maybe in the future, adding more granularity is something that can be an iteration.
Cool. So it sounds like we just want a way to make this timeout more granular than it is right now. It doesn't have to be each individual change per se. So it might be interesting to like look at Cap and see how it groups changes right now, and then try to pull off of that to just improve this.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it, Eli, to pick out whether or not you've already are baking into this request like the generalized approach. But that's kind of like the next step in my head is, okay, so this feels like it's describing kind of a specific, semi-specific, somewhere in between situation, and thinking about, well, what mechanism generally would solve that problem that would include this particular scenario. And maybe this is it. Maybe this is like that level of granularity. Yeah, but that's kind of where my head.
also like in theory, not in theory, like kapp is going to be deterministic about the DAG, right? But that's a true statement, right? It is deterministic. Cool. Okay, so that would not be a problem because it might group things differently in some sense, or if there's already already things installed in the cluster, it might not need to install anything, so the DAG will just bypass those changes without doing them. So in the end, I'm not sure like if the granularity should be at the node of the DAG or if on the group of changes that kapp's going to do at a particular point, but if it should be at per operation.
Yeah, I was thinking per operation, like every node.
Okay. Okay.
Not level of the graph.
Okay. Cool. So what happens? Do we want to keep the global timeout? Or do you want to have the ability to have both of them?
I assumed, I think removing the global timeout would be a breaking change, and I don't think there's a reason to remove it. I think this just sort of adds another toggle that a user could.
Not my question. Like what I was asking is, if you pass both, will you be able to pass both the global and this one, or do we want to have them like to work separately? You can only set one of them. It's okay if you don't know. We can find out that later. Like if you don't have like any constraint, I'm just trying to understand if there's like any sort of constraint in your side. I'd say like, no, if I have one, I want a one. If not, I want the other one. Okay, cool.
I think it makes sense to keep them both since someone using kapp may not know how many changes will happen when they deploy. So it might be hard to calculate like per change timeout times the number of changes you have, and that would be like the total timeout. It might still be helpful to then have, a total timeout where, if my deployment takes longer than this amount of time, definitely should fail. So I think it makes sense to keep both.
Yeah, I'm hearing the spirit of this idea is to fail as fast as possible without any false negatives. So that would make sense. You're like, look, regardless of what happens, if 30 minutes later this thing's not up, I don't want to. Yeah. And then in the meantime, there's certain things that I'd rather, if this thing that I know should come up in less than a minute, if it's been more than a minute.
Any other notes worth capturing here?
Is this going to be something that the producer of the deployment is going to have to define? Or is this going to be like a knob that the person that is installing something can also change?
I would say just the installer.
Yeah, like there's variables like, you're pulling from a registry, maybe pulling from that registry just takes slower in a certain environment versus others. That's something that the package author won't have any visibility in, but the person installing has a better sense of how fast things are on their data center. It does feel like the installer has the best information to know what value the timeout should be.
Yeah, it sure does seem like the author would have some sense too, like how complicated things are and generally how many moving parts in a particular thing. And it might be a matter of wanting to provide a good experience for their users to be able to have things fail fast, have that be in their control. I don't know. Like as the end user, you would need to dig in. You probably would. Your best, you're on best footing if you do know what's inside of your manifests. But that's not necessarily true. Yeah, so I can actually see both, a case for both. Those who are writing the package and those who are installing them.
So we should provide it as a YAML configuration plus a command line argument. Do we want this just for deploy, or when we delete, we want this as well, this feature?
Well, I just wanted to back up on that previous point, which is, so the package author, like communicating that a module that the package author is distributing, like how currently, how can they broadcast that something's going wrong during installation? Is there any other mechanism or tool they can use? Like, I want to create a deployment and I want to fail fast. Is there no other knob or option they can pull on to broadcast that, you know, this deployment is just not deploying correctly because of X, Y, Z? Are there any probes or anything else they could potentially use to fail earlier and not have to rely on time, which is, I think, really dependent on the data center and the place where it's really running? Like if it's missing a configuration option, do we have to just wait on a time unit, or is there some other way they can determine whether it should fail early or not?
Yeah, I think if you've gotten into the world of timeouts, it's because the more authoritative status condition isn't working for you for some reason. And then that gets into, well, I don't know how much of this deployment is bits that you have those control over. So is it stuff that if you're actually writing the controller that's doing the reconciliation, then you do have the ability to catch these things and report them as status conditions. But if you don't, then you don't. You don't have that ability. If you don't, can't affect that. So it's complicated, I think.
Fair enough. All right, so Joel, you were saying YAML file and command line?
Before we go into that, one more thought on the timeout thing. I think currently the only way to specify a timeout for the entire deployment is via flag. Don't think that you can do this via configuration, like a kapp-config file. So I see maybe providing this flag, or providing this in a similar way that you can specify timeouts right now makes sense as a first pass before we hear from others whether they have that use case.
There is the wait rules configuration cap that like lets you determine if a condition means success or failure. I guess that goes back to like what John was saying, if you don't control the conditions, but there's some ability.
But you cannot specify a timeout for those, though.
No.
Yeah, so maybe it makes sense only to provide it as a command line for now, since we don't have like a way to provide it as a global timeout in the configuration.
I think that makes sense.
Cool. So my question about the delete, do we want to add this as part of the delete or only as part of the deploy?
Probably has some use there as well. Okay. deleting your app is taking forever for some reason. Might be nice to know about
Would we
that.
want the would we want the tool to quit prematurely? I mean, there's some broad timeout, just like, okay, it's just like, you know, you're not going to literally wait days, but I'd be a sad panda if things were just taking a while and then the tool quit out on me. It's like, ah.
Going back to like the purpose here's to fail early. It seems like we would want to fail early for delete as well to give that feedback to the user as soon as possible. But I also see your point, John.
Yeah, I'm thinking, well, if they're watching the output or they're looking at logs, they would have some sense of whether or not there's progress being made. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, maybe I'll capture an item that we didn't come to a consensus on deploy and delete. But since we're short on time, I think we may want to. Does anyone else have any remaining thoughts that they want to capture in this comment? Or feel free to add to this issue directly. Cool. Well, I'll finish typing this. I can pass it over to you, Nancy.
Great. So we didn't get to that last item, correct?
We did.
The rename
That-
images when copying.
That's what I
handles?
said. Yeah, I said before everything. It's just to read it and add
Okay.
their opinion there.
Got it. Okay, I missed that. Thank you. Okay, well, then we were able to cover everything in this meeting. So there's nothing from this particular meeting that'll be moved to office hours, but there are usually discussion items that come from the next few days, and we'll add them to the office hours. But we highly encourage you to bring anything that you wish to discuss, or if there's anything that you need help with from the maintainers of Carvel, please bring those to the office hours, which are going to be this Thursday, April 8th at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. We have those office hours every second and fourth Thursday of the month. So we encourage you to join that. And then if not that, we do meet every Monday at the same time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time for our Carvel community meeting. And with that, we hope to see you soon. Great. Thank you.